Hey everyone, welcome back to Edu Expert, your smart learning hub. The first light of dawn has always carried a sense of mystery. It is that delicate moment when night surrenders to day, when silence still hangs in the air but the world prepares to awaken. In this fragile hour, skies across the Pacific Ocean stretched wide, glowing faintly with the colors of the rising sun. But behind the calm horizon, tension was brewing between two of the most powerful nations on Earth. Imagine a scenario where, just as the sun began to rise, military radars detected the faint trace of movement, an aircraft that did not belong to the ordinary world of commercial flights or civilian traffic. It was the U.S. B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, one of the most advanced and secretive weapons of modern aviation. Unlike other jets, the B-2 does not roar loudly across the skies. It moves almost like a ghost, designed to vanish from radar screens and pass unnoticed until it chooses to reveal its presence. For decades, the aircraft has symbolized America's invisible hand in the skies, capable of striking from thousands of miles away without warning. Now, place yourself in this unfolding drama. As the B-2 soared quietly through the early morning atmosphere, Chinese defense networks suddenly came alive. Operators in hidden bunkers scanned their radar screens, adjusting frequencies, hoping to catch even the faintest shadow of this stealth machine. To them, the B-2's presence was not just another flight, it was a reminder of American power hovering near their doorstep. The region was already tense, marked by years of disputes over territory, influence, and freedom of navigation. Every move was scrutinized, and every symbol of military presence was loaded with meaning. The rising sun may have painted the sky gold, but in the minds of those watching, it was a warning red. The B-2 Spirit, unlike any other aircraft, is a marvel of both science and strategy. Its flying wing shape eliminates many of the surfaces that normally reflect radar waves, making it almost invisible to detection systems. Covered with radar-absorbing materials, and engineered with precision, the jet represents billions of dollars in research and decades of innovation. For the American military, flying the B-2 in international airspace is not just a mission, it is a statement. It declares that even the most advanced defenses can be challenged, and that the U.S. is always within reach, no matter the distance. On the other side, for China, seeing this bomber so close was a test of patience, pride, and power. Would they watch silently as the ghostly plane flew near their defenses, or would they respond to prove their own strength? This was the dawn of decisions, where one choice could alter the balance of peace. Inside command centers, Chinese military officers discussed their options. Their screens displayed faint signals, like whispers of a presence that did not want to be found. Some argued it was better to ignore, to let the aircraft pass and avoid unnecessary escalation. Others insisted that silence would show weakness, and that their growing defense capabilities had to be demonstrated. The B-2, they said, was not just an aircraft, it was a challenge. The debate inside those rooms reflected the broader debate in global politics. How far should a nation go to defend its pride, and at what cost? Meanwhile, inside the cockpit of the B-2, the pilots remained calm. Trained for the most intense situations, they monitored their instruments with precision. Their aircraft was a floating fortress of technology, designed to slip through defenses and deliver strikes when commanded. But at that moment, their mission was not to fire, not to destroy, but to fly, a silent reminder of presence. The hum of the engines, the glow of the instruments, and the vast ocean below created a surreal contrast to the storm of tension building on the ground. And then, as dawn fully broke, the first spark of confrontation appeared. Reports suggest that a missile battery deep inside Chinese territory suddenly came alive. A launch order was given. In the blink of an eye, a missile was fired, piercing the sky with fire and thunder, racing toward the unknown trace it had detected. The world's balance shifted in those few seconds. This was not just a military action, it was a message. The missile's trail cut across the golden sky, a streak of power against the calm of morning. But what neither side expected was how fast the situation would escalate. The instant the launch was detected, U.S. Navy forces deployed in the region moved into action. Onboard ships in the Pacific, alarms sounded, radars tracked the trajectory, and commanders prepared to respond. The B-2 itself, built for survival, executed evasive maneuvers. Within moments, communication lines buzzed with orders, strategies, and counter-responses. The sky, once silent, was now alive with tension, technology, and the weight of history pressing down on every decision. This is where our story begins, not just with the firing of a missile, but with the reminder of how fragile peace truly is. In today's world, wars are no longer fought only on battlefields with marching armies. They are fought in the shadows of dawn, in the silence of stealth, and in the blink of seconds when choices decide the fate of millions. The B-2, China's missile launch, and the U.S. Navy's immediate reaction are all pieces of a larger picture, a picture where technology, pride, and diplomacy clash under the fragile light of a new day. For the audience watching this story unfold, the introduction is more than just the setup of a military confrontation. It is a lesson in how power is projected, how nations test each other's resolve, and how quickly moments can spiral into history-making events. As we dive deeper into this narrative, we will explore not only the weapons and strategies involved but also the politics, the risks, and the consequences that hang in the balance. The dawn may seem like the beginning of a new day, but in the world of global powers, it can also be the beginning of something far greater, far more dangerous, and far more unforgettable. To understand the significance of that tense morning, one must first explore the deeper background behind the events. The encounter between the U.S. B-2 Spirit stealth bomber and Chinese defense systems was not an isolated moment. It was the result of decades of technological rivalry, strategic competition, and the long shadow of history that stretches back to the Cold War. The B-2 Spirit itself is more than just an aircraft. It is the embodiment of America's quest to maintain air superiority and global reach. Developed during the 1980s by Northrop Grumman, the bomber was designed with a singular purpose: to penetrate the most advanced air defense systems in the world and deliver precision strikes without being detected. The cost of developing the B-2 was astronomical, each aircraft valued at over $2 billion, but for the United States, it was a price worth paying to ensure its military could operate anywhere on Earth with impunity. The Spirit's very name symbolizes its role: silent, invisible, and unstoppable. Its sleek flying wing design was revolutionary, breaking away from the traditional concept of aircraft with tails and vertical stabilizers. Every curve of the bomber was engineered to deflect radar waves, making its radar cross-section smaller than that of a bird. Equipped with state-of-the-art avionics, navigation systems, and the ability to carry both conventional and nuclear payloads, the B-2 quickly became the most feared aircraft in the U.S. arsenal. Since its first flight in 1989, it has participated in conflicts around the globe, from Kosovo to Afghanistan to Iraq, always striking with precision and disappearing before enemy defenses could respond. For China, the presence of such an aircraft near its periphery represented not just a military challenge, but a strategic message: the United States had the capability to reach anywhere, anytime. At the same time, China's rise as a global power brought its own story into the picture. Over the last 4 decades, China has transformed from a developing country into the world's second-largest economy and a formidable military power. Its rapid modernization has included the development of advanced fighter jets, anti-ship missiles, cyber warfare units, and an expanding navy that now rivals traditional Western forces. Perhaps most important has been its investment in anti-access area denial (A2/AD) strategies, systems specifically designed to prevent U.S. forces from operating freely near its borders. These include long-range surface-to-air missiles, hypersonic weapons, and radar networks spread across the South China Sea. For Beijing, the presence of American stealth bombers, aircraft carriers, and reconnaissance flights close to its territory is seen as a direct threat to sovereignty. The rivalry between the two nations extends far beyond military hardware. It is rooted in conflicting visions of global order. The United States positions itself as the defender of free navigation, international law, and open trade routes, principles that justify its military presence in the Pacific Ocean. China, on the other hand, emphasizes historical claims, regional influence, and the right to secure its surroundings from what it perceives as foreign encroachment. The South China Sea, with its disputed islands and strategic sea lanes, has become the flashpoint of this struggle. Over 30% of global trade passes through these waters, and both nations understand the stakes. Whenever a U.S. aircraft like the B-2 flies through international airspace near these contested zones, it is not just a flight, It is a message, a signal that the United States will not yield its role as the dominant power in the Pacific. For the global audience, it is essential to realize that incidents like the missile launch at dawn are part of a much larger chessboard. Both sides are constantly testing, probing, and demonstrating. Military exercises are held, fleets are deployed, and reconnaissance flights are launched not with the expectation of war, but with the intent to remind the other side of one's capabilities. Yet the danger lies in the unpredictability of human decisions. A single miscalculation, a misunderstood radar signal, or an overzealous commander can transform a test of strength into an actual clash. History is full of such near misses. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Korean War standoffs, and the countless Cold War intercepts where pilots stared at each other across cockpits, knowing that a wrong move could start a nuclear war. The dawn encounter between China and the US. B-2 thus carried echoes of those past crises. To the American public, the B-2 remains a symbol of invincibility. To the Chinese public, defending against such aircraft is a matter of national pride. Each side uses these moments to strengthen domestic resolve and show their people that their nation will not bow. Behind the scenes, diplomats scramble to manage the fallout, while military strategists analyze every detail. What frequencies did the radars operate on? What evasive maneuvers did the B-2 perform? How fast did the U.S. Navy respond? These technical details are not just academic. They shape future strategies, budgets, and even the design of next generation weapons. Another important layer of the background is the role of technology in shaping global power dynamics. In the 21st century, wars are not decided by numbers alone but by innovation. Stealth technology, satellite surveillance, artificial intelligence, and cyber capabilities have redefined how nations prepare for conflict. The B-2 Spirit is a masterpiece of Cold War ingenuity, but China's investments in quantum radar and hypersonic glide vehicles represent the new era. The clash between these two systems, the invisible bomber versus the unblinking radar, is more than a military duel. It is a competition between eras, ideologies, and visions of the future. For ordinary people across the world, this background story matters because it explains why headlines about missile launches or stealth flights are not isolated events. They are the visible sparks of a larger struggle. Every new aircraft unveiled, every base built on an island, every naval patrol in contested waters is a piece of the puzzle. When the dawn confrontation occurred, it was not a surprise born out of nowhere. It was the latest chapter in a long narrative where both sides have been preparing for moments exactly like this. Thus, as we examine the missile launch and the rapid U.S. response, we must remember that the roots of this story are deep. They stretch back to the Cold War, through decades of American innovation, through China's meteoric rise, through disputes in the South China Sea, and through the larger question of who will shape the 21st century order. The background is not merely context, it is the foundation upon which the entire encounter was built. Without understanding it, one cannot truly grasp why that dawn moment was so dangerous, so symbolic, and so unforgettable. The stillness of dawn had already begun to dissolve into tension, but nothing could prepare the world for the sudden eruption of fire that came next. Deep inside a Chinese military installation, orders were given, switches were activated, and in a matter of seconds, the calm of morning was shattered. A surface-to-air missile ignited, its fiery tail splitting the early sky. The roar of the launch echoed across the quiet landscape, and for the first time in hours, silence was broken not by birdsong or ocean waves, but by the sound of raw military power. The missile was fast, deadly, and precise, designed to reach high altitudes within seconds and lock onto any intruder that dared to enter contested airspace. For the crews monitoring this launch, the act was both a warning and a test. Their target was not just any aircraft, it was the U.S. B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, a plane that most radar systems could barely detect. Catching sight of it on their screens was like spotting a ghost, a fleeting shadow that seemed to appear and disappear at will. But with every adjustment of frequency and every scan of the horizon, Chinese operators believed they had a narrow opportunity to strike. The missile launch, therefore, was a statement. China was not afraid to confront even the most advanced machines of American engineering. As the missile cut through the sky, the pilots inside the B-2 remained composed. They were trained for this exact scenario, drilled endlessly on how to respond when enemy defenses attempted to lock onto their stealth aircraft. Their instruments came alive with warnings, sensors tracking the incoming projectile. In a split second, they began evasive maneuvers. Unlike fighter jets built for dogfights, the B-2 does not rely on speed or agility, it relies on invisibility and electronic countermeasures. The bomber's onboard systems immediately scrambled the missile's guidance, feeding it false signals and creating electronic noise to confuse its radar. To the missile, the bomber suddenly seemed to vanish, leaving it chasing illusions in the vast expanse of the morning sky. This was no ordinary duel, it was technology versus technology, silence versus thunder. On one side, a missile designed to destroy intruders at incredible speeds. On the other, a stealth bomber built to disappear from sight, using advanced coatings, radar absorption, and electronic warfare to survive. As the missile raced forward, its trail burning like a comet, it carried with it not only explosives but also symbolism, the determination of one nation to defend its skies and the resilience of another to prove its dominance. Military analysts often describe such encounters as a chess game played at the speed of lightning. Every move is calculated, every countermeasure timed to perfection. The B-2 Spirit's pilots adjusted altitude, banking silently into the thin air as their systems flooded the missile's sensors with deceptive signals. For observers, the sky had suddenly turned into a battlefield, even if no one on the ground could see it with the naked eye. The early morning calm had been replaced by a deadly dance between machine and machine, a contest measured in seconds but rooted in decades of preparation. Meanwhile, U.S. Navy vessels patrolling the Pacific detected the launch almost instantly. Satellites, radars, and communication networks lit up with alerts. To them, this was not just a local incident, it was a potential spark of escalation. Commanders knew that the missile's target was a bomber operating in international airspace, and any direct hit could have consequences far beyond the battlefield. Messages were transmitted, orders were prepared, and the U.S. response began to form, even as the missile continued its chase. Back in the air, the B-2's survival depended on the very essence of its design. Unlike conventional aircraft, which rely on speed to outrun missiles, the Spirit relied on disappearing altogether. The missile's seekers, desperate to lock onto something tangible, struggled as the bomber blended into the background of the sky. For a brief moment, the missile seemed to veer off, losing its course, chasing phantom signals created by the bomber's countermeasures. Then, with the laws of physics catching up, the missile exploded harmlessly in the distance, a bright flash that faded quickly into the morning light. The bomber remained intact, gliding silently forward as if untouched by the chaos behind it. Yet the significance of this exchange could not be ignored. A missile had been fired at an American stealth bomber. Whether or not it hit, the act itself was monumental. It showed that China was willing to take risks, to send a message that it would not tolerate what it perceived as intrusion. For the United States, it was a test of both technology and resolve. The B-2 had survived, but the attack demanded a response. Military officials on both sides now faced the delicate task of interpreting the event. Was it a defensive reaction, a miscalculation, or was it a deliberate attempt to demonstrate capability? The missile attack became a turning point in the narrative. What began as a quiet flight at dawn had escalated into a moment that could shape international headlines. For those following global security, this was the scenario they had long feared. A direct engagement between two superpowers, even if limited to a single launch. Every move from this point forward would carry weight, not only for military planners but for politicians, diplomats, and ordinary citizens who wondered what tomorrow might bring. Beyond the politics, the attack also revealed the incredible pace of modern warfare. The decision to launch, the flight of the missile, the evasive maneuvers of the bomber, and the detection by the U.S. Navy, all of this unfolded in under 2 minutes. In that brief window, decades of research, billions of dollars of technology, and the fate of global stability collided in the sky. For a world accustomed to conflicts playing out over months or years, the missile attack at dawn was a stark reminder of how quickly history can change. As the B-2 Spirit continued its mission, the skies behind it bore silent testimony to what had just occurred. The missile's smoke trail faded, but the echoes of its launch remained in the minds of everyone involved. For the pilots, it was a reminder of the risks they carried every time they took off. For the Chinese operators, it was proof of their willingness to confront a formidable adversary. For the U.S. Navy, It was the trigger that would soon justify a decisive response. And for the world, it was a story that highlighted both the fragility of peace and the razor's edge on which modern powers balance. Thus, the missile attack was not only an event. It was the moment when silence turned into fire, when dawn became danger, and when the thin line between demonstration and escalation was crossed. The moment the Chinese missile streaked into the sky, alarms across the U.S. Pacific Command lit up. To the American military, this was not merely a test, it was an act that demanded an answer. Within seconds of detection, communication lines linked ships, submarines, aircraft, and satellites into a single web of coordination. The U.S. Navy, with its unparalleled global reach, was already in position. From guided missile destroyers patrolling the Pacific waters to nuclear-powered submarines operating silently beneath the waves, the arsenal of American power stood ready. What happened next was a demonstration of modern warfare, rapid, precise, and overwhelming. The U.S. Navy operates on a doctrine known as full-spectrum dominance. This means the ability to respond not just with one form of power but across all domains: air, sea, space, and cyber. When the missile was launched at the B-2, the first response was not a physical strike but digital. Electronic warfare units immediately began jamming enemy radars, cutting off communication between the missile base and its command center. Satellites relayed exact coordinates of the launch site, while reconnaissance aircraft confirmed details. Within moments, the United States had mapped the origin of the attack, pinpointing the exact base where the launch had occurred. Then came the strike order. From a U.S. Navy destroyer stationed hundreds of miles away, hatches opened, and Tomahawk cruise missiles were prepared for launch. These weapons are the very symbol of precision warfare: long-range, terrain-hugging missiles capable of striking targets with accuracy measured in mere meters. Unlike the raw roar of the missile fired earlier at dawn, the Tomahawks travel silently at low altitude, weaving through valleys and over oceans, guided by GPS and terrain-matching systems. Their purpose was not to destroy everything in sight but to surgically disable the enemy's ability to fire again. In military language, this is called a suppression of enemy air defenses mission, and it is designed to neutralize a threat without escalating into full-scale war. The launch was swift. Multiple Tomahawks arced into the sky, disappearing over the horizon, each one programmed with the coordinates of radar systems, missile batteries, and command bunkers. The precision of these weapons meant that civilian areas were untouched. The response was targeted only at the systems that had engaged the B-2. Within minutes, explosions rocked the missile base. Command consoles went dark, radars collapsed, and the once confident operators suddenly found their systems disabled. The retaliatory strike was overwhelming in its speed, leaving no time for countermeasures. For those who had just fired a missile moments earlier, the shock of seeing their entire base silenced within seconds was a chilling reminder of American reach. But the U.S. response was not limited to physical strikes. Alongside the Tomahawks, cyber units launched digital offensives against Chinese defense networks. Firewalls were probed, communication links jammed, and false data flooded systems to create confusion. In modern warfare, disabling information can be as devastating as destroying hardware. By the time the Tomahawks hit, Chinese commanders struggled to even understand what was happening. Their screens showed ghosts, their communications crackled with interference, and their radar returns failed to make sense. It was as if the battlefield itself had been plunged into fog, while the Americans moved with clarity and coordination. At sea, aircraft carriers positioned further south launched F/A-18 Super Hornets and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare jets. The Growlers added another layer of suppression, jamming frequencies, and ensuring no secondary missile launch could threaten American aircraft. Surveillance drones circled above, providing live imagery to command centers thousands of miles away in Hawaii and even Washington, D.C. The integration of all these forces, aircraft, ships, submarines, cyber units, and satellites, demonstrated why the U.S. military is considered unmatched in its ability to respond to crises. For the pilots inside the B-2 Spirit, the transformation was surreal. One moment they were the hunted, evading an incoming missile. The next moment, they were protected by an invisible shield of coordinated American power. They listened to the comms chatter, heard reports of Tomahawks inbound, and knew that their survival was no longer in question. The stealth bomber continued its mission unscathed, gliding silently through the dawn sky as U.S. Navy weapons eliminated the threat behind them. On the global stage, the speed of the response carried symbolic weight. It was not just about defending one aircraft, it was about sending a message. The United States was demonstrating that any act of aggression, even a single missile launch, would be met with immediate and decisive consequences. Analysts often say that deterrence is built on credibility. If a nation does not respond to provocations, its deterrence weakens. By responding so swiftly and with such precision, the U.S. reinforced its credibility not only to China but to the entire world. Yet this response was carefully measured. Noticeably, the U.S. strikes targeted only the missile base and related systems. Civilian infrastructure was left untouched, and no attempt was made to expand the conflict beyond the specific incident. This balance, being decisive but not reckless, is central to American strategy. It sends a dual message. Aggression will not be tolerated, but escalation into full-scale war is not the goal. Diplomats would later frame the action as a defensive necessity, while military leaders quietly analyzed the effectiveness of their response. The destruction of the missile base within minutes after the launch also highlighted the vulnerability of static defenses in the modern era. Fixed installations, no matter how fortified, are increasingly at risk against long-range precision weapons. For military strategists, this event became a case study in the shifting balance of power. Mobile systems, cyber defenses, and stealth are proving more reliable than fixed missile batteries. For China, the loss of the base was not just a tactical setback, it was a strategic reminder that even advanced systems could be neutralized in seconds by American precision. Around the world, governments and military analysts closely watched the U.S. response. Allied nations like Japan, South Korea, and Australia saw reassurance in the speed and precision of American action. They understood that the U.S. commitment to defending its forces and allies was more than words, it was capability demonstrated in real time. On the other hand, adversaries and competitors studied the strike with equal interest, taking notes on American tactics, timing, and integration. Every missile launch, every counterstrike, every jammed radar was not only a battlefield event but also a lesson for future confrontations. For the ordinary observer, the U.S. response at dawn showed how modern warfare has transformed. Battles are no longer fought with massive armies clashing over weeks or months. Instead, wars can unfold in seconds, shaped by satellites, guided missiles, and cyber attacks. The image of a missile base silenced within moments of firing serves as a reminder of both the power and the danger of 21st century conflict. The tools of war have become faster, smarter, and more precise, but also more unpredictable. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the Pacific and the Chinese coast, the battlefield slowly returned to silence. The B-2 Spirit had vanished into the sky, continuing its mission as if nothing had happened. The U.S. Navy ships maintained their patrol, calm and steady after the flurry of action. For China, the base lay quiet, its systems dark, its operators stunned by the swiftness of the retaliation. And for the world, the message was clear. In the delicate balance of global power, seconds can decide outcomes, and the United States had once again shown its ability to respond with unmatched precision. The missile launch on the American B-2 Spirit bomber by Chinese defense systems sent shockwaves across the globe. Within minutes of the news breaking, headlines appeared on international media networks, framing the event as one of the most dangerous encounters between two superpowers in decades. From Washington to Brussels, Moscow to New Delhi, and across the United Nations headquarters in New York, the reaction was swift, divided, and filled with both fear and calculation. The incident was no longer just about a single missile fired at dawn. It became a symbol of a shifting global order and the fragility of peace in an age of technological competition. In the United States, the reaction was immediate and fierce. Political leaders, military officials, and analysts condemned the attack as a reckless provocation. The Pentagon released statements highlighting the resilience of the B-2 and emphasizing that no aircraft had been destroyed, but the very fact that one of America's most advanced stealth bombers had been targeted triggered alarm. Cable news channels replayed computer simulations of what could have happened if the missile had hit, stressing the catastrophic consequences. American senators called for strong diplomatic pressure on China, with some voices demanding economic sanctions, while others urged a military show of strength in the Pacific. Public opinion quickly polarized. Many Americans expressed outrage online, framing the missile launch as an attack not just on a plane but on national pride and security. Others, however, questioned why a B-2 was flying so close to China in the first place, hinting that U.S. strategic choices may have provoked the confrontation. In Beijing, the Chinese government framed the incident in entirely different terms. State-controlled media portrayed the missile launch as an act of defense, not aggression. They emphasized that the B-2 was detected near Chinese airspace, suggesting it was part of a surveillance or intimidation mission. The Chinese Ministry of Defense issued a carefully worded statement declaring that China will always safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Within China, nationalist sentiment surged. On social media platforms like Weibo, citizens praised the military's quick response, hailing it as proof that China could not be intimidated by American power. Far from being defensive, the reaction inside China celebrated the incident as a historic moment where the balance of power had shifted. Across Europe, the reaction was mixed. NATO allies expressed solidarity with the United States, condemning the attack and stressing the importance of protecting freedom of navigation in international airspace. Leaders in London, Paris, and Berlin held emergency consultations with Washington, wary that the situation could escalate into a larger military confrontation. At the same time, European analysts voiced concern about being dragged into a new Cold War dynamic. Energy prices, trade flows, and global supply chains were already fragile due to earlier tensions, and the prospect of open conflict between the US and China alarmed European businesses and governments alike. Editorials in major newspapers like The Guardian and Le Monde called for restraint, urging both sides to step back from escalation and re-engage in dialogue before a full-blown crisis erupted. Russia's reaction was closely watched. The Kremlin issued a vague statement, neither condemning nor fully supporting China, but Russian state media used the incident to criticize U.S. military presence in Asia. Commentators framed it as evidence that American power was no longer untouchable, and that the age of U.S. dominance was declining. Behind the scenes, however, Russian diplomats likely saw opportunity. Any confrontation between Washington and Beijing would give Moscow more room to maneuver on the global stage, especially in energy markets and security alliances. Some analysts speculated that Russia might quietly offer China intelligence sharing or logistical support, while publicly maintaining a neutral posture to avoid direct confrontation with the United States. India, Japan, South Korea, and other Asian powers had their own unique reactions. In New Delhi, officials expressed concern about rising instability in the Indo-Pacific region, wary of being caught between two giants. India has long had a tense relationship with China, and while it did not celebrate the missile launch, it quietly welcomed anything that challenged Chinese dominance. Japan and South Korea, however, reacted with alarm. Both nations rely heavily on U.S. security guarantees, and the idea that a stealth bomber could be threatened so close to Chinese territory raised doubts about the reliability of American deterrence. Tokyo called for an emergency meeting with Washington, while Seoul urged all sides to prevent further escalation. Across Asia, stock markets dipped sharply as investors feared the outbreak of conflict could disrupt trade routes that carry trillions of dollars in goods each year. At the United Nations, the Security Council convened an urgent session. Diplomats clashed over how to frame the event. The United States pushed for a resolution condemning China's missile launch, while China defended its actions as legitimate self-defense. Russia sided with China in blocking any harsh language, while European nations tried to mediate a softer statement emphasizing de-escalation. The failure to produce a unified response highlighted the fractured state of global governance in an era of multipolar rivalry. The Secretary-General urged restraint, warning that any miscalculation could ignite a conflict with consequences beyond imagination. Global media amplified these tensions. Western outlets focused on the vulnerability of the B-2 and the audacity of China's response, while Chinese and Russian media painted the incident as a turning point proving that American stealth technology was no longer invincible. Commentators debated whether the missile launch was a warning shot, a test of new Chinese radar systems, or a deliberate attempt to send a political message. Social media erupted with speculation, conspiracy theories, and heated debates. Hashtags like #WorldOnEdge and #B2 missile strike trended on Twitter, while Chinese users spread slogans celebrating their country's military achievements. Financial markets mirrored the uncertainty. Oil prices spiked as traders feared instability in Asia would disrupt shipping lanes. The value of the dollar fluctuated as investors weighed the risk of U.S. involvement in another prolonged military standoff. Defense stocks, meanwhile, surged, reflecting expectations of increased military spending in response to the threat. The world economy, still recovering from earlier crises, faced another wave of turbulence as businesses reconsidered supply chains and shipping routes in case of future conflict. Perhaps the most profound reaction came not from governments or corporations but from ordinary citizens around the world. For many, the incident was a reminder of how fragile peace truly is in the nuclear age. The image of a missile rising toward a stealth bomber captured the imagination of millions, symbolizing how close the world stands to disaster when great powers clash. Peace activists organized demonstrations calling for dialogue, while think tanks and universities held urgent forums analyzing the strategic implications. The sense of unease was global, cutting across borders and ideologies. In conclusion, the global reaction to China's missile launch on a U.S. B-2 spirit was far from uniform. It exposed the deep divisions in international politics, with some nations condemning the act, others justifying it, and many urging restraint. The event became a mirror reflecting the world's fractured order. America's pride was wounded, China's confidence was elevated, allies were shaken, rivals were emboldened, and the general public was left anxious about the future.